And somehow, within minutes of this happening, the New York Times knows what I'm holding in my hand. They know the subject of the secret grand jury subpoena. How the hell do they know that? Of course, the New York Times is talking to, coordinating with, working with the FBI. And that's why I wrote this book.
What?
Because I know this sounds crazy. It sounds like science fiction. It's not science fiction. This is my life. This is real. This is truth. This is the reality. And you need to understand the reality you're living in. The New York Times and the FBI are working together in a world when journalists are supposed to speak truth to power. They're representing the power.
Welcome to the Mikhaila Peterson podcast. This is episode 135, featuring Project Veritas CEO and founder, James O'Keefe. James is a self-described guerrilla journalist who organizes and performs undercover investigations to expose corruption in both the public and private sectors. He's involved in a lot of scandals, mostly with Democrats. Twitter suspended his account in April last year, but have since let him join back. You can't tag him on Instagram either. Undeterred, James has a new book, American Muckraker, which describes some of the resignations, arrests, and FBI raids he's been involved in since the birth of Project Veritas. James is definitely a muckraker. I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, please consider subscribing. Before we get started, I have a cybersecurity question for you. Do you ever use Facebook to log in somewhere else? What if someone somehow gained access? Hackers would get a free shot at all linked accounts, which is terrifying given how many accounts use Facebook to log into. The outcomes of that could be harmless or could go to full-blown identity theft. Thankfully, we have NordPass. That's what I use. NordPass keeps all your notes and passwords in a single, incredibly secure location only you can access with the master password. It also monitors password health and data breaches like Facebook and LinkedIn had last year, so you'll know before anything bad happens. Put your mind at ease online with NordPass. Visit nordpass.com/TMPP, like the Mikhaila Peterson podcast acronym, or use code TMPP for 50% off 2 years plus a free month of NordPass Premium with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Only available until February 10th at nordpass.com/TMPP. Use code TMPP. I hope you enjoy this episode. James O'Keefe, welcome to my podcast.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming to Nashville and seeing me in person. This is fun.
This is amazing.
Yeah, this is great. Well, you're here to discuss this American Muckraker.
That's right.
But before we get started, probably, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, can you give a brief background about who you are and what it is you do?
Well, I'm the founder of a group called Project Veritas. And what we do is we're a group of investigative journalists. We've been around for about 12 years, and we go around, usually undercover, catching people in the act, doing waste, fraud, abuse, corruption. And recently, our model has shifted to whistleblowing. So people on the inside of these institutions come to us, usually with documents or recordings, irrefutable proof of fraud or abuse or lying or hypocrisy. We used to go undercover to try to get on the inside, but now there's just a lot of these people on the inside that come to us. They come to our tip line, and we then send our undercover people out to corroborate what they've found. And we've done stories, you name it, we've done stories on it, and you name the institution, we probably have people inside that institution trying to blow the whistle. Our tagline is "Be brave, do something," and we try to encourage people to not be afraid.
That is crazy. Like, how did you get started doing that kind of thing?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but in a nutshell, I'm 37. When I was a teenager, I went to college in New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey. And I remember at a relatively young age, I looked at the media and I was reading the New York Times every day front to back. And I felt there was something off about the way the information was presented. Things were not as they seemed and often rarely as they should be. I didn't know what to do about it. But I went to college and I was surrounded by professors who were avowedly communist, and it kind of, I guess it could radicalize me a bit. Political correctness, I was really outraged by, so I decided to do this sort of stunt journalism. And I was pretty shy at the time. I was like 19 years old. And I decided to ban Lucky Charms on the grounds they're racist against my Irish heritage. I did so as a form of satire, like sort of Borat meets 60 Minutes. But they took me seriously. This is in 2004. Now, irony is a little dead these days, but at the time, it was funny. And the dean of the university took it seriously and told me that they would indeed remove Lucky Charms. This is the first sort of hidden camera.
What year? What year was this?
This is actually St. Patrick's Day 2005.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the genesis of this technique of exposing them for who they are, getting them on videotape being who they are. Therefore, no explanation is required. It just makes sense to the viewer. And that's what we try to do at Veritas. It's cinema verite. It's direct. You don't have to trust my interpretation of the events. You just show people the reality.
Okay. So have you been censored at all? Because if what you're doing is going out and trying to expose the truth, so it's all video footage,
mostly,
that kind of,
yes.
Yeah. Has that been censored on any platforms?
Oh yeah, we're removed on Twitter. I'm banned on Twitter. Project Veritas is banned on Twitter. You can't tag me on Instagram. It says I've been spreading, quote, false information about COVID. But the thing about that's interesting is that anything we've broken on COVID the last few months has been Pfizer executives speaking out of their own mouths. I didn't make these statements. We quoted a Pfizer executive saying that your antibodies are stronger than their own vaccine. That was a Pfizer scientist on hidden camera. We broke a story from Vanessa Gelman, a director at Pfizer Pharmaceutical, saying you should not tell people about fetal cells, human fetal cells used in the development of the vaccine. So we report on what these people are saying, and they ban me for quoting them. I don't know why they're not banning the people making these statements.
Yeah.
So we're censored, but it really hasn't stopped us. The story we did last week on DARPA, documents inside the Defense Department, was trending #1 on Twitter, even though we were banned.
Okay. I want to get into that actually. What is DARPA? I'm so not well versed in this kind of information. So what does DARPA stand for?
Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And they're a division of the Department of Defense in Arlington, Virginia, Washington, D.C. And this was a document that Veritas released last week from a source. And the document stated, it was written by a Marine Corps major, Commandant Fellow at the Defense Department. So very serious people. Mm-hmm. And the Marine Corps major argued in this document, which was buried in a top secret share drive. We obtained this document, Mikhaila, and the document stated that there was gain of function research in March of 2018. This group, Eco Health Alliance, approached the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense rejected the gain of research proposal because it was too risky.
So what is gain of function? Gain
of function is research done on COVID, on bat-borne coronaviruses, to do research on this thing, to develop this COVID, military applications, national security applications. The Department of Defense rejected this proposal on the grounds it was not safe.
So that's good.
That's a good thing. But the document also states that Dr. Anthony Fauci proceeded with the research through NIAID. If that's true, if what this Marine Corps guy is saying inside the Defense Department is true, then Anthony Fauci lied in Congress. So last week, Dr. Fauci brought up these documents in a Senate hearing, and
he brought them up.
He brought them up.
Okay.
He brought up Project Veritas in his weird New York accent. Veritas. He brought them up, and he appeared to authenticate the documents, but he questioned what the Marine Corps was saying, Major was saying.
Okay.
A lot to unpack here. A lot going on.
Yeah. So did he suggest that the documents were real, but the Marine Corps was lying?
Right. What he said was something to the effect of, I have not seen that proposal to DARPA, but the EcoHealth Alliance proposal to DARPA may have been different than the EcoHealth Alliance proposal to NIAID. So I think he was probably playing a semantics game there. And what we want Anthony Fauci to do is release these documents. The public has a right to know at this point. And if Anthony Fauci does not release the document, then there's a good chance that an organization like Project Veritas might release the document vis-a-vis a whistleblower.
Wow.
Just like the one that was just released. These documents are not authorized to be released. And if you do a FOIA request, this information is often redacted. And this is really belies the mission of what we're trying to accomplish. We think that government is in an advanced state of sclerosis, where you can't legislate, judges can't solve these problems. You can't get FOIA requests to get the documents. You need whistleblowers. You need people on the inside who are brave enough to jump on a metaphorical grenade and give up their livelihood for the public's right to know. And there's really not many places where those people can go, but they can go to Project Veritas.
That's wild. Do you think any of these documents that you're potentially exposing put the American government at risk?
No. I think you have to make an editorial decision on a case-by-case basis, but because I don't know how many, 5.4 million people have died and many more people suffer as a result of this, I think the public has a right to know. And I think you always have to there's this chapter in this book called Privacy. I had a conversation with another podcast, Eric Weinstein, who you may know, and him and I went on it for 2 hours. And his criticism of me was, James, you harm people. Your journalism harms people. And what I told Eric, which is the same thing I'll tell you, is that in a society like the United States of America, where you place a primary value on the public's right to know, your journalism is always going to harm people. But there has to be a balancing test between the value of the information versus the harm done to the individual. In this case, it's a no-brainer. This is an epidemic that's killed people, and we need to know the origins of it.
Okay. I think that's reasonable. I think that's completely reasonable. What was Eric saying was damaging? It was that in particular?
I don't think Eric was making a whole lot of sense in his argument, and I told him that. You can go watch it on YouTube. He had this whole, he's a mathematical genius, so he made this whole analogy. I wasn't on the efficiency frontier. In other words, I should blur people's faces more often. And I told him, well, if I did that, then people would question the credibility of the material. And I disagree. I think in order to go after the institution, you have to expose the individual. You have to put a name and a face on it. And I also told Eric that we do record people without them knowing. And some people think that's unethical. No one wants to be recorded without them knowing.
Yeah.
But the difference is whenever we do that, we're always with the person. I would never bug someone or record you when you're completely alone. And we would make the argument that the recording device is an extension of the right to speak. Because if I write down what you say, it's not going to be as accurate as if I recorded you. So we believe that recording someone, so long as you're with them, it's basically a constitutional right. It's a human right.
Okay. I can see how I can see how people would argue against that. But depending on what you're using that for, and especially if it has to do with COVID, then that seems like a necessity at this point. How is this kind of job? Okay, so how long have you been doing this? You said you kind of got started in journalism when you were 19, which seems kind of early for picking up on the politically correct universities. 2005?
Yeah. This is
early.
When I started the Centurion at Rutgers, it was before Facebook. I mean, I think Facebook was November 2004. And I remember I was laying out the newspaper in the summer of 2004. It was before Twitter. It was before YouTube.
Wow.
It was very early. And I would do the New Jersey equivalent of a public information request into all of my professors' salaries. So this is
like the worst student.
Well, I didn't get my classes get in the way of my education. Let's say it that way. I remember going into the public records office, and they just had the information. I just scanned it and published it, and I would put the newspaper in the P.O. box for all the professors. It was like muckraking, transparency. And it was a very uncomfortable thing for me to do. But I felt it necessary. Then I started confronting professors with a video camera. I did that, in college. And then I graduated from college, and I proceeded to do it on a bigger scale. Planned Parenthood, did some work with Lila Rose, who's an activist. And then I did a story on Acorn, which was
I'm not familiar with Acorn.
Organization that gets money from the government to deal with foreclosed homes and voter registration drives. And I went into Acorn as a pimp. I dressed up like a pimp, and I got a 20-year-old girl to be she was playing the role of a prostitute. And we went into Acorn saying we wanted to start an underage prostitution business. It was like a sting operation.
What?
This is about 11 years ago. And it was a big story. The videos caused Acorn to be defunded in Congress as a result of these videos. And that was really that really got Veritas on the map and led me to do many more stories like that.
That's wild. Wow. Have you ever taken any personality tests? Just like side note.
I've taken one called DISC. Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard of DISC.
DISC?
No. I'm pretty my dad has one, so
what is that called?
It's for Understand Myself, but it does the big 5, so it judges how agreeable you are or how neurotic you are. You don't strike me as somebody very agreeable or very neurotic.
How would you characterize? What is your first impression?
Well, you have to be unbelievably disagreeable in order to do the kind of work you do, right? Like most people would be more concerned about, I think, the feelings of other people. And you look like you're more concerned with the information that's out there and the truth, right?
Yes.
And then neuroticism, that's just like how likely you are to experience negative emotion and anxiety. And I don't think you'd be able to do what you're doing if you were a neurotic person. Interesting.
I never thought about the neurosis. I do think there's a chapter in this book called Character, and I try to identify the qualities of someone in this day and age who could do this sort of journalism, speak truth to power. And the New York Times used to say, do the journalism without fear or favor. What does that mean? Well, without fear, but without favor. You're not chasing after rewards. You're not doing this for some type of financial gain. So I've done a lot of introspection, and I did talk to a psychologist, and I said, help me understand myself. Like what, because everyone comments, everyone's so afraid. All the comments are, do you have security? And I don't really think about that. I do have security, but I don't worry about it. And I think it has to do with the fact that we're not really political people, but we're branded as such. I think political people, the essence of it is you want to do harm to those who are on the other side of you. And that's really not our mission. I also think you have to have a degree of tunnel vision. I don't know how that compares with neurosis, but you have to be extremely tunnel vision. Nothing can get in your way. You have to be indefatigable. Laura Logan, who's another journalist I deeply respect and admire, I was talking to her about some of the things that we've been through, and she said, well, those things are great for you because those are what get the sources to trust you. So when you do go through this pain and you get arrested and sued and you keep going, you're effectively getting the people inside the government to trust you enough to come to you in the first place. So it's kind of all accumulated.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah, because that makes sense. Okay. Well, how has this been? I know I heard of something about an FBI raid.
Yes. When they banged on my door, I knew that it was the authorities because they had just raided 2 of my former colleagues 2 days previous. So my first thought as this banging and I woke up was, how long have they been banging on my door? Because I knew within a matter of seconds they were going to break the door. So this is what's going through my head in an FBI raid. I sprinted towards the door so that they wouldn't break the door down. And I went to open the door and I put my hand on the doorknob and I'm saying, I'm opening the door now, because this is like a movie. I mean, they're like, FBI, open up, just like you would think it would be. And I think it'll like shoot me when I open my door. So I open the door and there's this like close encounters of the third kind, bright white lights in my face. I can't see anything. It's pitch black, 6:01 a.m. On a Saturday morning in New York. So they turn me around and handcuff me. And I'm in my boxer briefs, and they put me in the hallway of my apartment building. My neighbors are obviously at this point all awake. And at first I think, am I under arrest?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if I'm under arrest, let me speak to my attorney. but evidently they had a search warrant signed by a magistrate judge, which is a lower federal judge in the Southern District of New York, which is a federal jurisdiction in New York State. And then they showed me the search warrant, and it listed a number of crimes that either they may think that I have committed or somebody else may have committed. Those crimes include accessory after the fact and misprison of a felony. What does that mean? Well, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to paraphrase what I think it means. Misprison of a felony is effectively a bystander law that you know somebody else has committed a crime, but you didn't do anything about it. Oh. Accessory after the fact, well, that's pretty self-evident. That means that you helped someone. But I'm a journalist, and journalists have stolen documents sent to them all the time. I did not know that this diary was stolen. I don't think it was. Currently, I don't think it is. But even if it was, it's my right under the Constitution to publish it, which I didn't.
So that's legal as a journalist. You can be sent things or given things and publish them.
Yeah. Supreme Court case 2001, Bartnicki v. Vopper establishes the right of a journalist to publish a document which is stolen so long as the journalist played no part in the theft of that document. It's a Supreme Court. I mean, it's kind of common sense. Imagine someone sends you something and it's stolen. Well, you can't control whether it was sent to you. And so the Supreme Court has established this, and I knew that. So I'm holding the search warrant, right? And I'm kind of to be a little vulnerable for a minute. I was in a state of, I guess you could call it PTSD after this occurred, because I had been arrested 10 years prior, and I'd been through this whole federal process. It's the process that is the punishment, oftentimes, with these things. And I was holding the search warrant in my hand, looking at it, as these agents backed away. They sort of back away while they're taking photographs. And I'm like, am I dreaming? Am I in some type of Dostoevsky novel? I don't know what's going on. And then while I'm holding the search warrant, which lists these chicken shit charges, absurd, ridiculous crimes, they would never charge the New York Times with these crimes because it's laughable. I get a text message from the New York Times. And somehow, within minutes of this happening, the New York Times knows what I'm holding in my hand. They know the subject of the secret grand jury subpoena. How the hell do they know that? Of course, the New York Times is coordinating with, working with the FBI. And that's why I wrote this book.
What?
Because I know this sounds crazy. It sounds like science fiction. It's not science fiction. This is my life. This is real. This is truth. This is the reality. And you need to understand the reality you're living in. The New York Times and the FBI are working together in a world when journalists are supposed to speak truth to power. They're representing the power. Now, what was interesting about this episode is that while the New York Times was working in concert with the FBI, there were a lot of other journalists out there who did defend us. You had a lot of people on the left who were upset about this. The ACLU defended Project Veritas.
What is the ACLU?
American Civil Liberties Union.
Okay.
And a lot of these organizations disagreed with us on our stories, but they still came to our defense. But this is truly an extraordinary series of events. It's ongoing. I have not been charged with anything. And a federal judge in New York ordered the FBI to stop going through my phone. They took my 2 cell phones, and only my 2 cell phones. They didn't take my iPad or my laptop, which is very unusual. This whole thing is unusual.
That is extremely unusual.
Yes.
So I didn't realize that a judge would be able to, like I said, I'm not very familiar with the hierarchy of these organizations, but I didn't realize a federal judge can just tell the FBI to leave you alone.
Well, the FBI and the Department of Justice are executive branch agencies, and they need permission from a judge to execute a search warrant. It's a very aggressive move for the FBI to execute a search warrant. For the FBI to execute a search, they put you in handcuffs, they raid your home. This is a very intrusive and highly aggressive move. And usually they don't do this without indicting someone. But they do need permission from a lower federal judge. So the judge that signed the search warrant in New York, question is, why did she sign it? What did they present her with as the justification? And then an Article 3 judge, that is to say, a federal judge for life, a judge named Torres in New York, ordered them to stop going through my phones and assigned what's called a special master over the FBI, an independent individual, independent legal individual. This thing is wild.
That's crazy.
It sounds like I'm making this up. I'm not. This is all happening. It's still happening. I don't know how it's going to conclude. But I think the thing about it is that there's different rules. If you work for NBC News or CBS or the New York Times, then there's another thing that happened. They published my attorney-client privilege documents within days of this happening. My private lawyer memos, the New York Times did, that were stolen or obtained illicitly. So how did they get copies of those? We don't know. So this is what happened in the last few months.
That's that recent.
Oh, yeah. This happened in November, just 3 months ago.
Wow. Do you have a family?
I have a mother and a father and a sister. Yep.
Okay. So you were by yourself when the FBI came?
Yeah. And
that's unbelievably stressful.
But I have a good team. We have a good team at Veritas. In fact, some of them walked into the studio here. There's a bunch of them, and they're good people. And I always say that I can't continue doing this without people beside me who, it's not easy, but it's not always so difficult. There is great joy in fighting, and there's just some days that are very hard. Some days, and then you get through that day and put your pants on the next day and go back at it.
So I probably kind of already touched on this, but why do you continue doing this if things happen like the FBI raids your house? Like, that is scary. That's like, right. I can imagine you being, well, like you said, concerned you're going to get shot. So why keep doing this if it's ending up being potentially life and death?
I don't think that I'll get shot. I think initially when you're so passionate about something and you have a very clear vision of what you want to do and what you want to accomplish, at a certain point, you're so committed, the passion and the desire to see the thing happen will overcome whatever marginal fear you may feel, because the excitement and the fun of it, I don't know, maybe fun is not the right word, but the desire to see your vision come to fruition is so motivating. I'm not a psychologist, and frankly, I think you probably know more about that field much more than I do, but speaking personally, you're so passionate about it that you'll do anything to see it come to fruition. That's the first reason. That's the most important reason for me. The second reason is the responsibility. All of these people in the government that come to you and they say, please don't stop. And they say there's nowhere else for us to go. I mean, these people, military people, we have sources inside the Department of Justice. We have people inside tech and Pinterest and Facebook and Google and Twitter, and you have a responsibility. So you really can't stop because those people look up to you. But I would say the first most important reason is the passion.
Okay. And what is it like? Can you tell me exactly what it is that you want to see come to fruition?
I think more people coming out, exposing what's really going on.
And what do you think is really going on? Like, what's underneath all this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Things are not as they seem, and as Mike Wallace has once said, as rarely as they should be. The world that's presented to us by our media officials are often the official sanctioned information. Journalism used to be about running towards the podium asking questions, and now they run away from the podium towards us with sanctioned information. And if you say anything contrary to the orthodoxy, that they'll censor you. So my vision is a mass movement of whistleblowers and insiders to release the real information.
Okay.
And I'm very hopeful. Most people are very cynical and hopeless. I think that will happen. I think it is happening. But mark my words, I know that will happen.
You don't think something like big tech is going to take that out? Like you release too much information on certain platforms, you just delete you off of that platform?
No, because I believe content is king. I believe if the journalism, you're Canadian, right? Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian philosopher, didn't he say something like the image will replace the politician? I'm paraphrasing. The image is so powerful. There's a chapter in this book called Image. Images transfix in a way that words do not. So Veritas's whole model is video. I don't report anything unless you can see the people's lips moving. So the video we did last week on literally the Pentagon Papers. I mean, I don't know if the New York Times would publish the Pentagon Papers these days. Literally, it wasn't my words. It was this Marine Corps guy inside the Defense Department. And what was remarkable is that not only Mikhaila did tech not to censor that video, they took it down eventually, but people were like organically uploading it until it trended #1 on Twitter. And I'm not even on Twitter. So I believe if the story is strong enough and good enough, it'll trend.
Okay.
On networks that don't like the story.
Okay. I think that's probably reasonable. Wow. Well, that's a lot. Okay, I've got a bunch of questions. I haven't gotten to any of them yet. But I've got a bunch of questions for you. Okay, let's start with this. Well, I mean, we kind of covered this with the FBI, but have you been threatened for uncovering things personally?
In what way?
Well, I guess anyway. Letters, people showing up, misinformation put out about you.
Oh yeah, I mean, that the way they usually threaten or intimidate you is through the legal process, lawsuits and litigation. But
and is that like going into people's personal lives and getting sued for doing that? Or is it just random threats like what happened with the FBI?
Initially, there's a whole chapter in this book called Litigation, and I talk about they've sued us so many times. We've never lost a lawsuit. They use the lawsuit as a vehicle to try to bankrupt you or punish you or expose your emails through the discovery process of litigation. And in the evolution of my doing this, I quickly realized that will only work so long as you do something wrong in private. Anything we do is going to come out, right? I can't keep secrets. So in the discovery process of a lawsuit, they obtain my emails if it's relevant to the lawsuit. And if I write something in the email that I don't want people to see, they'll find it. So I learned through this process of litigation that the people that want to shut us down, they do keep secrets. They don't want to be sued. They stopped suing us when they realized, I could, when we do discovery, I can depose you too. I can get your emails. And then they realized, I thought O'Keefe was going to fold and give us a settlement. We don't settle lawsuits. And sometimes that means we have to spend $1 million or $2 million to get to a jury trial. And I could have made it go away for $100,000. So I think that the number one, is it a threat? It's a form of coercion, intimidation, and an attempt to silence you and break your will. It's always the courts. It's always the system of justice, the system of injustice. That's how they've primarily done this. In 2010, I was arrested in a federal building in New Orleans, Louisiana, for trying to investigate a senator. I walked in off the street in plain clothes, showed my real ID. It's an open building to the public, and they arrested me. And when they found out who I was, they charged me with a crime I didn't commit. It was a 10-year felony.
What?
Yeah, 10 years for trying to destroy federal property, interfere with a telephone system. I wrote another book about that. It's called Breakthrough. And you as a young 25-year-old, idealistic, naive, sort of bushy-tailed young man. And I was it was traumatizing. I was put in shackles, federal shackles, in an orange jumpsuit. My mugshot made the front page of the New York Times on Sunday above the fold. And they made me out to be I was trying to bomb a federal building with my iPhone. It was ridiculous. True story.
Wow. How long were you wrapped up in that for?
3.5 years on federal probation. I was arraigned. I was put in a parish jail in New Orleans. So when you say, we could talk about that for 30 minutes. I won't. You can go out and read the story, go online and read about it. My point is, so far, thank God, there has never been any violence or any, sort of those sorts of threats. I think people are, unless you're a lunatic, you're afraid I'm going to expose you with your plot to commit these things.
Yeah.
They put you in shackles and put you in jail. That'll deter people. And the whole point is
some people.
Well, the whole point is they want to deter other people from following in our footsteps. But if you keep going, you send a message to those people that they can do it too. If you keep going, you're going to inspire, in fact, more people than if you had not gone through that to begin with. Mm-hmm. And I thank those prosecutors in New Orleans every day. And they're the ones who are suffering. They all got disbarred, by the way, lost their law licenses. That's another thing I've learned. The world is round. That bad people do bad things and get away with it, but not forever. Not forever, especially when there's an army of whistleblowers out there watching and waiting with hidden cameras.
Okay, what are the top worst things you've uncovered? Like, have you ever uncovered anything have you ever gone down a rabbit trail that you didn't know at all where it was going to lead to, and you were shocked at what you discovered? I want to hear some of those stories.
Interesting.
Or did you always have some sort of idea, like even with COVID? I mean, there were quite a few people talking
right.
about whether or not it was, what were the origins, and so has anything been like absolutely shocking?
Wow. I'm thinking we've done a lot of things. I think I'm not shocked. Oftentimes, you try to confirm suspicions. You have a suspicion or a hypothesis. For example, antibodies are better than the vaccine. You might have a hypothesis.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's go out and confirm that. So in that case, we actually did launch an investigation to Pfizer, and we did record a Pfizer scientist saying those words. We confirmed the suspicion. That's harder to do if you're an investigative reporter. The easier thing to do is to let the source come to you and determine what the story is. Because if you have a hypothesis, you could spend years trying to confirm it and fail. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to get on the inside of an organization like that without running afoul of the law, and we don't break the law. So oftentimes the better thing to do when it comes to going down a rabbit hole is have the source come to you, and don't publish it without corroborating it. Don't try to get a couple different sources to confirm it. Another wild thing, 2016, the 2016 election, we did a story on a guy named Bob Creamer and Scott Fovel in Chicago and Wisconsin. And they were going around to Trump rallies, and they were bird dogging, as they called it. They were inciting violence at these rallies and blaming it on Trump. And these people were on tape admitting to this.
Oh, wow.
And this guy worked for close to Hillary Clinton. This is in 2016. Very powerful guy, close friends with Barack Obama. And he said into a hidden camera, "Don't tell anybody that we're doing this." He literally said those words. And
how do you get people in close enough to these other people, and then those other people will actually admit these things? Like, wouldn't you? Why would you tell someone you weren't very close with some of these secrets?
Well, that's a good question. And the bottom line is you have to build a rapport with someone such that they trust you.
Wow.
Undercover work. Again, we don't do this as much these days because we have whistleblowers. But back when I got started, undercover work was often about finding what people's needs were. And a lot of people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by a sense of ego. They brag, or they'll brag to a beautiful woman, or some people are motivated by sex. So you're trying to figure out what their need is and meet the need. So in that particular case, Bob Creamer needed money. So there was a donor who had a niece, and he confided all of these things to the donor's niece in a public place where it's not illegal to record, in a public cafe.
Wow.
And he was speaking loudly enough in this cafe where people around him could hear him. So it's perfectly legal, but he did not know that he was being recorded.
Wow. So when you were doing all this undercover work, who came up with the ideas on how to kind of get people to talk?
I think the people that I hire, I try to, I'm the CEO of the company, but these days we've gotten to such a size where I'm not speaking directly with the sources. I'm trusting the people that I hire. We're training them. We have a pretty rigorous curriculum, and most of it's ethics. There's a chapter in this book called Ethics. I talked to
interesting. Okay.
Eric Weinstein for 2 hours about ethics, actually on that podcast. And it's, ethics is a tough thing. It's because it's inherently situational, right? If I'm deceiving you in order to extract or elicit a truth from you, I'm doing that so that I can tell the truth to the people out there. But if I'm identifying myself as who I am with you, and I'm saying, oh, by the way, this is being recorded, it's just a law of human nature that you're less likely to be honest with me. And if you're not honest with me, and I'm broadcasting the dishonesty, I would argue that that's the not as good as if I was deceiving you and broadcasting the truth to the public. So it's a question of relative deception. And you only have these two options in journalism. And where journalism got corrupted is that these New York Times reporters, Washington Post reporters, CNN, whoever, will say, hi, I'm from CNN. Tell me, Mr. Government official, tell me what's going on inside your department. It's like, give me a break. They're never going to tell you where the secret juice is. So people say, well, James, you're a liar. Well, yes, we deceive the subject in order to tell the truth to the audience because it's a question of relative deception. And I argued with Eric about this, and Weinstein thought, well, I could do a little bit of a better job. I could be more efficient. I could reduce the harm more. And I said, I disagree. I think we're doing a pretty good job of it. And by the way, nobody else is doing it. So where's your control variable? Yeah. What are you weighing this against?
Yeah.
So we don't want to blur faces. We want people to see people's intonation and body language when we show the fraud or the lies.
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't know if I'm torn or not. I don't think I am, especially in regards to some of these issues like COVID, or you got into voting fraud too, right?
Yep, voter fraud.
Okay, we should cover that too.
Absolutely.
But the idea of like the ethics behind this, I can see how that could come up. It's interesting. I've definitely thought about that in my life too, because my dad is extremely focused on truth, right?
Yes.
He's like, tell the truth or at least don't lie, right? And so I got that hammered into me.
I'd love to know what he has to say about this question of ethics and undercover, and I wonder what his position would be.
I know. We should set that up. We'll set that up at some point. I'm interested.
That's a fascinating issue. It's really fascinating because one ethicist in this book, I quoted someone, and he said, you can't justify deception in the abstract. It's like trying to invent dry water or fireproof coal. How do you justify deceiving someone in the abstract? It's always this like balancing act, this utilitarian test. So yeah, if you Google me, if you Wikipedia me, if your audience is not familiar, you'll say, James O'Keefe lies. Well, okay, but so does CNN and the Washington Post, but they lie to millions of people. I wouldn't characterize it as lying. We present ourselves as something that we're not in order to elicit the truth so that we can broadcast the truth to the people. Yeah.
So I had issues with this. I was really sick as a kid. And I can remember when I was trying to figure out my autoimmunity, I had doctor's appointments where I'd tell them what they needed to hear in order to get the information I needed in order to continue figuring out what was wrong with me. And I had absolutely no issues with it. I was like, some of these things aren't true. I had the same issue when Dad was sick over the last couple of years, and it was like, sometimes telling people the truth just doesn't end up with the truth.
Right.
But it is complicated.
Very complicated. And there's this whole, like, again, I'm not a mathematician, but you wrestle with the ethics of it. You have to wrestle with it. You don't like harming people. That's not the point. But if you put a primary value on people's right to know information, you don't have a choice but to do it. It's very interesting. I think it's interesting. I think this whole theme of journalism is interesting in this world we live in because there's so little of it. There's so little journalism happening.
Yeah, it's crazy. When do you think this switch happened? Like,
that's a good question.
Because at some point, I mean, I don't know, because I don't know when it was, but people used to be, you know, anti-government and kind of anti-authority, and journalists were seen as truth seekers, and they're going to expose people. So I feel like, I don't know when that was, maybe the 70s when they were doing what you're doing, but when did that switch over to whatever we see now? That's
a great question. I try to trace it back. I think you're right. It's the 70s was like, the 60s and 70s to me was just the absolute quintessential muckraking journalism. You had the Chicago Sun-Times used to do, you think I'm hardcore. These guys used to buy a bar and they called it the Mirage in Chicago. And the journalists purchased a bar and pretended to be bartenders and like filmed everything. And they got shady deals and people doing backroom deals and bribing city inspectors. They had hidden cameras in the rafters.
Wow.
That was hardcore for like months. You had, you have European journalists like Günter Wallraff, who pretended to be a reporter at the Bild, which is Germany's largest newspaper. You had Upton Sinclair. I mean, he was the quintessential American muckraker in 1906, wrote The Jungle. He went undercover, but he took off his tie. He had a lunch bucket pail, pretending to be like one of the guys at the meat packing plant. And he wrote about all of the conditions inside the jungle. Something changed, I think, in the 1980s and 1990s. I think it was litigation was a big one. In 1992, ABC News was sued by Food Lion Grocery. Food Lion, big grocery store chain. ABC News, Primetime Live, did a sting operation where they put hidden cameras in their wigs and they filmed. They were bleaching the meat. They were repackaging rotten meat.
Ew.
Food Lion's stock tanked, okay? And ABC News got sued by the grocery store for, I don't remember the exact legal issues, but it was trespass or something like that.
Oh, wow. And they won?
And ABC News won on appeal. But it cost, as these things do, millions of dollars.
Oh.
So, or over $1 million. So the commercial imperative, I might actually sound like a socialist here, and I don't mean to. I'm just being honest. The commercial imperative is incompatible with truth-telling. Because if your goal is to report on these things aggressively, well, you'll get sued. And then you have to spend all this money defending yourself in court. So what's the easiest thing to do if you're a capitalist? It's to not do it in the first place.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a nonprofit, so the profit is not our motive. Mm. But ABC News stopped doing that. Was a shot across the bow for investigative journalism. Mike Wallace, the former legend at CBS News, he stopped doing ambush interviews. And over time, you had newspapers die out. There are no more real newspapers anymore. As big tech grew in the early 2000s, there was the consolidation of news. And then you had this phenomenon where journalists became too close to their sources. They don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. They tend to extol the virtues of these people in power rather than to condemn them. And I get it. If you're a beat reporter, if you're a New York Times national security reporter and you got your government sources inside the NSA, what are you going to do? Expose them? You'd be out of a job. And that's what happened. And now it's become, and then you add this fear thing onto it where they'll raid you and take your shit if you expose. All these things combined, there's nobody doing it. And of course, the only people who can do it are independent citizens, usually without the money, the resources, or the backing. That's what happened. And it's taken about 30 to 40 years for us to get this far.
Wow. I don't think I've really thought about that before. Yeah, that's pretty weird. Because normally, I remember first coming across your stuff and I thought, wow, I think first I was like, no way. I think that was my first reaction.
No way. You didn't believe it? Or?
I think I probably did because there was, there were videos. I was like, it's like too good, right?
Too good to be true.
Yeah, kind of. Like these stories are, you go and investigate some of these, what some people would call conspiracy theories, and then you're proving them. And I mean,
right.
I'm with you there. So I was just surprising. I was like, this is a different kind of journalism than we've seen. And then I remember kind of feeling like, is it appropriate?
Ethical.
Is it ethical, right? And then being kind of torn there, but mostly like, yeah, it's probably ethical. But then going back to like 60s and 70s, it wasn't even abnormal, right? When you thought of a journalist, that's actually what you thought of. And now that doesn't exist anymore, which is crazy.
Yes, it is crazy. It is crazy. The people in Chicago and the Chicago Sun-Times, I think Pam Zeckman said that everyone was afraid of City Hall. No one wanted to speak about these bribes. And if you read a book called The Mirage, it's about this bar that they purchased in 1977. But Ben Bradley, the famous, legendary executive editor of the Washington Post, denied the Chicago Sun-Times a Pulitzer in 1978 or thereabouts. And his rationale was they used too much deception to get the story. You have to remember, in the early 70s, you had reporters like William Gaines, who literally dressed up as a janitor and assisted in surgery at a Chicago. He won the Pulitzer Prize. Can you imagine me helping someone do surgery? They'd think that was unethical. It's pretty hardcore. But William Gaines exposed the fact that surgeons were having janitors help them dissect people.
What?
This is a true story. No one knows this. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 1972. The Pulitzer Prize. So when they stopped giving out the trophies for doing undercover work, when they started suing you for doing undercover work, guess what happened? People stopped doing it. People stop doing it. You have to be, I'm going to keep plugging the book because I have to. And by the way, all proceeds go to Project Veritas. It's a great book. The first chapter of this book is called Suffering. You kind of have to be a masochist. You kind of have to like pain to do this. That's not why I do it. I don't like pain. And a lot of people will look at the people that work for me and be like, what's wrong with you? But we're just passionate. We believe. But yeah, it sucks. It hurts. It's painful. It's a reputational hazard. But yeah, journalism is dying. I don't think it's dead. And again, I think it requires normal, everyday people, honest cops, honest nurses. I'm doing a story right now, which I will release next week, involving a massive bombshell. And I can't talk about it specifically, but I told you off the air. And it involves just everyday, normal, honest, hardworking people who have just had enough. And say, hey, James, give me one of those hidden cameras. Please, mail me one of those cameras, because I see this stuff happen and I just need to record it. Just ordinary. They don't want to be famous. They don't want to lose their job, but they've had enough.
Okay. Well, I've decided I think that's reasonable. Like, if you're working in a corporation, I can see the need for privacy as well. But if you're working in a corporation that deals with the public too, and things are shady enough that your employees are like, I need a hidden camera, then maybe something's up there.
You're probably going too far. Well, how do you define privacy? Where do you think that boundary is?
I don't think it would be an issue if people didn't lie. Exactly. So if you're not, like, I can understand where you're coming from when you kind of need to tell people a story in order to get the truth out. But I think in personal lives, if people don't live a lie, then they probably don't really have to worry about privacy. I don't know, but then it's hard to say, because if government laws change, then sometimes you're forced to lie in order to not be in trouble. I don't know.
Are you saying that people committing malfeasance don't have any right to privacy? Is that effectively what you're saying?
No, because I think, like I said, I think laws can also change, and then you end up being a criminal whether or not you want to be. This episode is brought to you by Paleo Valley 100% grass-fed beef sticks. Paleo Valley is a company that is doing great things for people's health. They're committed to making high-quality food that won't harm you or the environment. Their products come from small family-owned farms right here in the U.S., and their cows are never fed grains or antibiotics. So if you avoid meat for environmental reasons, Paleo Valley is a great match. You've probably heard some of the tricks companies use, like claiming their beef is grass-fed because it at some point ate grass, or American-made meat that's really only packaged in America. If you guys want a snack that's actually healthy, this is a fantastic option. I can't eat it because I can't eat spices because I'm a bubble person, but my brother loves it and Scarlett loves it too. You can help your body and the environment by trying Paleo Valley's high-quality protein today. Just head over to paleovalley.com and enter code MP for 15% off your first order. That's paleovalley.com with code MP for 15% off your first order of these bad boys. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
The privacy issue is I think it's not so much about privacy, because most of these things are filmed. People know that they're being spoken to. They know they're sharing information with a stranger. So it comes down to societal trust issues. Why are you sharing this information with someone you barely know?
Yeah, that's what I said earlier.
Exactly. And frankly, what I've found, which is counterintuitive, is that people are more likely to be honest with complete strangers. Think of it. Taxi cab confessions, the person you met at the bar, the hairdresser. You're more likely to say the truth to people that you don't know. It's also against your interest to betray someone. It's usually the person that's doing that's violating their own. But I think it's more to do with dignity. I think that there's something about being filmed. Because think about it. I can write down what you said. I can write about it. And you wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that. But if I film you and you don't know it, and I've been trying to study this because I can't figure it out. Why is recording someone do them more harm than writing down what they say? And that's a really fascinating subject. I've done a lot of research into this issue to try to understand it. And I've found that some courts have suggested that you're violating the person's dignity. It's about your right to control the dissemination of your own image. So this is a really fascinating thing. And as I think as we grow, as undercover work, these cameras now are so tiny, I'm not wearing one right now. But for the Acorn story, I put one in my tie, and it was the size of one of these little icons on my tie, and you couldn't barely see it. And maybe one day they'll make cameras for your eyeball. I kind of have that image on the front cover of the book here. I don't know. Maybe they'll put it in a lens, like a contact lens, and you're filming everything. So this is not the government doing this. This is civilians doing this. So the law doesn't apply. It's just about ethics. It's about an ethical question and harm to people. Ultimately, transparency will be a good thing for society. It'll be a very good thing.
Oh, yeah. And I think right now it's pretty evident that we need more transparency. I think if we go in the direction of, okay, there are individuals that might be harmed from this, but there's more transparency across some of these institutions. I think at the point we're in, that is necessary, right? That risk is worth taking. Well,
let me give you an example of this is interesting too. How image compares with the written word. The New York Times. I keep on picking on the New York Times for a reason. The New York Times wrote a story about us. They published our private attorney-client documents. I don't know how they got them. They were obviously stolen or taken without our consent.
Wow.
That means communications between me and my lawyer, and specifically the lawyer that is suing the New York Times, which is in the United States. You can't do that. It's a fundamental law of American jurisprudence. You don't publish the other litigants' attorney-client memos. The New York Times did this, and the memos were quite favorable to us. The memos were like, we don't break the law. Here's how you avoid breaking the law. Here's how you behave ethical. But the New York Times headline was written in the following way. Documents show how far Veritas's deceptive reporting practices could go before running afoul of federal laws. You know another way of saying that? We check with our lawyers to make sure everything we did was legal. But do you see how they worded it?
Yeah.
You have to kind of twist the newspaper to understand what there's. It sounds like I was traipsing over the boundary when the memos clearly show. So what I'm trying to say is that they use words in a mendacious way. They're able to write about, that cup of sparkling water and make it seem like a cup of Coca-Cola. But when you film the object, it clearly shows that it's a cup of sparkling water. And that's why I think what you said is correct. The more things are filmed, the more accountable these people are going to be, and the more free we're ultimately going to be. Because they have a way with words. And I've never seen it this bad, Mikhaila. When they wrote that article, I was beside myself. Because, of course, when you write a headline like that, what's the pundits on Twitter going to say? Yeah. There goes James O'Keefe running afoul of those federal laws. Well, no, that's not what the article said. But they twisted it.
Yeah.
And I know you know what I'm talking about because they do it every day. You know? It's maddening.
Yeah, it is maddening. Okay, well, I probably need to. You mentioned voting fraud. I know you did a bunch of work into that. Okay. So I'm like, I'm not very familiar because I'm Canadian actually. So I kind of just heard.
Are you
heard about all this.
You're not an American citizen yet or becoming one? You're a Canadian citizen? Slowly?
Yeah. Never going back to Canada.
Never?
So, no, things have to change dramatically before I go back to Canada.
You're from Toronto?
Yeah.
Toronto. The city or the suburbs or?
Toronto, right downtown. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They just wrecked it.
Really?
It's really disappointing. Yeah. I'm like blaming the government for that one.
When did you leave?
COVID just wrecked it. September. I was concerned. I thought, they're like, oh, you have 85% vaccination rates. We're going to open back up. And I thought, yeah, except, then there'll be another variant and there'll be another outbreak in the winter and they'll shut everything down again, even though everyone's vaccinated and I'm leaving before that happens. So I left in September and I really left. I threw away my stuff and left.
Really? That must have been hard though, because it's your home.
I think I've been through so many like weird experiences that it wasn't that hard. I'm like a bit upset that because Toronto was a pretty good city, had really cool little areas. It was kind of like New York tiny New York. And it was cool. And now like the downtown is wrecked. All the cool little unique stores are closed down.
Right.
The neighborhoods I grew up in are in terrible shape. And like my family, my family that's back there, my brother and my parents now are like, maybe we need some backup plans because of the state Canada's in. So I don't know if it was scary. It was a little bit scary, I guess, but mostly aggravating.
I understand completely. I'm from New Jersey and our office is in New York State and I'm still there and I'm reluctant to leave because it's my home.
Yeah.
But they're pushing it pretty hard.
Yeah, it's pretty nice in Nashville.
It is nice.
I gotta say, it's pretty nice here.
Yeah.
Okay, voter fraud. Was any of that real? Like I heard a lot of people talk about whether or not that was a
our
real
stories
thing.
or just generally, just speaking specifically to the reporting we've done, or just speaking broadly about the election, or both?
No, broadly. I'm broadly.
Well, and I don't know if I can speak broadly because I don't know enough to comment. I can only talk to what I witnessed. I can only give you anecdotal evidence.
Okay, that stuff. That's what I
can give
want.
you the anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
In other words, things I've caught on tape that actually did happen.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean there was enough fraud to overturn the election. No.
Okay.
It just means that fraud happened specifically. I think when people use the word rigged, they mean something different. They mean like sort of this media system. There's a book by Molly Hemingway called Rigged. She talks about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and their alliances. I only speak to what I know to be true. In Minnesota, we did a story featuring a Somali man named Liban Mohammed. This is in Ward 6 in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a very heavy Somali community. And there was ballot harvesting. What does that mean? They collect other people's ballots. And it is illegal to harvest ballots.
But what does that mean, collect other people's ballots?
Go around and collect third-party, but pick them up. So someone comes to your apartment and pick them up. And there was evidence to suggest that he was filling them out. And there's this one video that he filmed. He filmed himself. I did not film him. James O'Keefe claims, I didn't make these claims. He made these claims. He filmed himself on Snapchat privately, but one of the sources came to me with the recording. And Liban Mohammed was in this car covered in absentee ballots. And he's bragging about all the ballots that he's collecting, hustling at 2 a.m, collecting all these ballots. And I report this because it is a crime to have more than 3 ballots in your possession in the state of Minnesota. Another video shows a cash exchange for an absentee ballot to fill it out. It's on videotape. You can see both of their faces. They're speaking in Somali, but we got a translator. This is a federal felony. Again, one instance of voter fraud. Mm-hmm. Is it enough? I don't know, but obviously if it happens once, it happens more than once. It doesn't mean it's enough to overturn a national election. But it is my job to report this, and I do. September 27th, 2020, report this video. This video goes wildly viral. I mean, it's blockbuster. You have a cash exchange for ballot caught on tape.
Yeah.
The next day, the New York Times, our friends at the New York Times, publish a section hit piece, and the headline is "Experts Say." I don't know where they find these experts. Experts say Project Veritas video was a coordinated disinformation campaign. The first sentence of the article says a deceptive video released by James O'Keefe. And again, there's that word again, deceptive. Well, the video is not deceptive. The video happened. I didn't even film the video. It was filmed by Liban Mohammed and posted to a Snapchat. But the New York Times had interviewed Stanford researchers, that's Stanford University, California, and got some professor to opine on how I was a disinformation person. The rationale was I met with Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, a couple days prior to show him this video. And therefore, it's disinformation because I'm coordinating with people, but it's called an embargo in journalism. So they write this article, Mikhaila, and then what happens is absolutely fascinating. The article, the New York Times comes out. And then, of course, the New York Times is the holy Bible, if you will, in the tech world. Facebook bans the video, citing the New York Times because the New York Times said it's disinformation. And it's this, and then before you know it, people such as yourself or good citizens out there are thinking, yeah, that Veritas, didn't they ban that video for disinformation? Did that really happen? But it all happened because the New York Times quoted some expert in California saying it's disinformation. So we sued the New York Times for defamation. I said enough is enough. I was beside myself when this article came out.
Yeah.
I sued them for defamation. And just to give you an idea of how rare it is for someone who sues the New York Times to win, there's only been, I don't know, less than a dozen people in 50 years to have survived the initial motions in a lawsuit. We survived motion to dismiss in a defamation lawsuit against the New York Times. And the judge in New York said it was the New York Times who engaged in disinformation and deception. His words. And then the New York Times was forced to answer our lawsuit about this voter fraud video. And they admitted, Mikhaila, in court that, in fact, it was illegal what Liban Mohammed did. They admitted in the documents he did break the law. But guess what? They haven't corrected the initial article. So we're living in Gaga land. We're living in clown world. People say, who's going to hold these people accountable? Well, we did. We sued them. We're winning. They still haven't corrected the article.
Wow. So
you asked me about voter fraud, and I'm going to give you anecdotal evidence like I just gave you. I can tell a few more stories like this. I would swear to it under oath that was illegal, what he did. But in a world where the video is taken down off of these platforms because it's disinformation, because credible journalists say so by virtue of their own decree that they are indeed credible because they're credible. How do you disprove that? How do you fight that? What do you do? What's your recourse? How do you hold them accountable? I think we're getting farther than any other organization has. I think we are winning. We're beating them in court. But to some extent, these people think they're above the law. They think that nothing can hold them accountable. So that's one such story. I could tell more, but that will give you an insight into how it is. I don't think there was enough, en masse fraud, but there certainly was anecdotal fraud.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. We talked about Fauci a bit, but I feel like we should cover that a little bit more and then wrap this up.
All right.
Why is it that you think, why is Fauci still a good guy in the mainstream news? If what you uncovered is true, then how is it that the narrative, how is it that that's not widespread? And why? That was a lot of questions there. So good luck with that.
Natalie, you may have stumped me on this one. I think this speaks to the heart of everything we've been talking about.
I don't understand what's going on at this point.
Why do people think Fauci is a good guy despite the evidence shows that he, for example, has lied? Or why do people?
Yeah, and if what you've uncovered is true, if that's true, then why is there what looks like this giant conspiracy?
I think that's a psychological question. I think it's people believe what is easiest for them to believe. It's tough to have their minds changed. We live in a world where people want to watch CNN, and I'm picking on these organizations because it's laughable. It's disgraceful at this point what they put on TV. But why do people watch it? Why do people want to believe the chyrons on CNN? Because it's easy for them, convenient for them. When you shatter that narrative, when you show them the reality, they don't want to look at it. They don't want to believe it. That's a psychological. I'm not qualified to answer that. I'm a journalist. I'm not a psychologist. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that those documents inside the Pentagon are real. The Marine Corps major, we got reached out to him for comment. He did tell us that there are other people inside the government that are good people that are trying to reform from the inside. We have another source. We have multiple sources back them up. So I can tell you with 100% certainty that these things are real. Why don't people want to believe it? Well, I think to some extent we are changing people's minds, not to everyone's mind. And I would push back on the notion that everyone still, or the majority of people like Fauci. There may be a small fraction of people that do. And you're just hearing more of it because there's an unequal representation on TV. And I think we're making a difference. You just can't change everyone's mind at the same time. It takes a little while.
Okay. That's fair. I suppose also when you stop believing in some of these narratives, then, and I think this has happened to me, then you end up questioning everything, right? It's like, okay, if one thing that you firmly believed in, even if that's like legacy media or something, if that's not what you think it is, then what else do you know isn't true, right?
Right.
Like what else do you believe in that's a complete lie? And then that's painful, right? Going through that. It sounds like you went through that
at an early age.
I don't know if you even went through it. Were you just always like that?
Yeah, it was like this weird trait that I had when I was a kid. I don't know. I remember I was obsessed with the media as a young man. And my mom was like, why are you always bitching about local news? And it was just bizarre. I did not think I was going to go into journalism. I didn't know even what that even means to go into journalism. I just would watch the local news and say, well, that's not the way it is.
That's so weird.
I would read the New York Times and I would say, this is not the way it is. And it was the contempt. It was the righteous indignation. It was the realization that how things were portrayed were different than how things are, and things are not as they seem. And that motivated me. I didn't know what to do. I knew that it was wrong. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know. Maybe people are uncomfortable, like you say, to change. People believe what they want to believe. But I have seen people change their mind. I saw a law professor after our New Hampshire expose showing dead people voting. He actually changed his mind. I have the email. He said, I never thought in-person voter fraud was possible until I saw your video. And sometimes, even if one person changes their mind, it's still worth doing. I'm not a pollster. I don't know how many people, but, people have been arrested. Raquel Rodriguez was arrested in Texas after we exposed her, involved in selling votes and buying votes. She was arrested by the Attorney General of Texas.
What?
Last year. None of this was reported in the media, of course.
Yeah.
Still trended on Twitter. They took it down, but it trended. They can keep taking it down, but we just got to do more of it, So.
Wow. Okay. Well, James, that was wild. That was wild. I'm going to link this. This is going to be linked in show notes and on YouTube and everything. It's worth checking out. This is real journalism.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming and talking to me. That was fun.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone, I'm going to make a shameless book plug. American Muckraker. We're a nonprofit organization, and if you buy the book, all proceeds go to Project Veritas. We're a 501c3, and stay tuned for, I don't know when you're putting this out, but as of the time of this filming, next week we have another COVID follow-up story, and this one is shocking.
That's gonna be crazy.
Involving
That's gonna be
kids.
crazy. Yeah.
Involving children, 5 years old to 11 years old, things that happen to them with this vaccine. This is crazy, but it's real. It's true.
Where do people go online if they want to follow you?
We're still on Instagram. Barely. You can't tag us, which is it's damaging because the most people will follow you by virtue of other people tagging you. We're on Telegram. We have 700,000 followers on Telegram, and we upload the clips into a Telegram. You can go follow Project Veritas on Telegram, and people will upload those 1-minute clips into their Instagrams and into their Twitters.
Oh, wow.
We call it distribution by proxy, and it's working effectively. And you could sign up on our email list and follow us on Instagram, Project Veritas, and American Muckraker is the book. We're also having, Mikhaila, and I'm inviting you on the air, a book party, a book launch party in Miami on January 29th. You can get tickets to that at projectveritasexperience.com. And again, all proceeds go to Project Veritas.
Okay. Well, thanks, James.
Thank you.